Hi, all. This is JP Isabel in the Secretary of State's office. I guess the meeting got started a bit without me, even though I'm the host. That's fine. I'm still new to Zoom, so we'll wait for the board, and they will start the meeting once they're here.
Thank you, JP.
Here we go. Morning. Any member of the apportionment board who's not in the meeting, please raise your hand. You just go through the room. We have Jeremy.
I don't see Jeannie.
Jeremy, are you with us? I don't see Jeremy and Jeannie, but we do have a quorum and a full agenda, so I think we will get started, and I will call the meeting to order. And just note, as we have in the past for the record, that we are meeting remotely pursuant to the various executive orders, the Act 92 from last year on the Zoom internet platform, where everyone can hear one another simultaneously, either through that platform or on a phone connection. At the last meeting, we mentioned the minutes of the March 25 meeting, but it wasn't clear from the notes that I and I think JP took whether we actually took a vote on the March 25 minutes. And so we have that up, plus the April 29 meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to either of those draft minutes?
One question on, I don't know if it was said in the minutes for the last meeting, but it said, Jeannie said that the state population rose 6.8%. I think it was 2.8%. I don't know if that's what she said and that was recorded correctly, or if I have a misunderstanding of what the number is.
Thanks for bringing that up. Let me pull up the draft as circulated.
Yeah.
That would be,
this is JP.
that would be,
Said it was 2.8. It should be 2.8.
I think that's what it was. Now I'm not so sure about the number I had, but that's the number I put into the op-ed. So I want to make sure we get it correct.
and that would be the April meeting minutes, Rob?
Yes. Last month. What was last month? April, May. Yeah, April.
I will, this is JP. I'll make that correction. I might have either misheard it or mistyped it while in the middle of the meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Well, with that clarification for the April 29 meeting minutes, would anyone like to make a motion to approve those minutes and the minutes of the March meeting?
I'll make a motion that we pass both.
Okay, Rob moves. And is there a second?
A second.
Mr. Koch. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? See any hands raised? All in favor of passing the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say no. Any abstentions?
I abstain. I wasn't present. Jean McDonald.
But Jean, I don't know that if you're not a member of the apportionment board, then you don't need to cast a vote on the minutes. So,
Thank you.
I think we're good. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comment. And I've received in advance a request to be recognized for public comment from Linda Weiss. So Linda, if you could unmute and identify yourself and tell us what's on your mind, we welcome.
Thank you very much, Special Master Little. My name is Linda Weiss. I live in Corinth, Vermont. We are part of a 6-town, 2-seat House district, Orange 1. I'm joined here today by all 3 members of the Corinth Select Board, Rick Cawley, Nick Kramer, Carl Demrow, by our town treasurer, Dick Kelly, by Jean McDonald, another resident of our district who lives in Berkshire, Bernie Ben, another interested party. And I want to thank you, Special Master Little, for indulging my email string and communicating with me. It was very generous of you, so thank you. We are here to request that you take a really good look at Orange 1 and do your level best to see if you can find a way to put all of the towns in Orange 1 into 1-seat districts. And let me give you some reasons why that feels imperative to us. The district itself covers 242 square miles and 6 towns. It is the largest geographic area outside of for a district, House district, outside of Essex County, where the towns are much smaller and much farther spread apart. It's a fairly untenable place to get around for a variety of reasons. One of the big challenges of the district is that the largest town in the district is Williamstown, and that consists of close to 40% of the population of the entire district. And 4 of the other towns are fairly well balanced between about 1,000 people and up to 1,400 people. And Williamstown is projected to have over 3,500 people. As a result, in the entire 20 years we've been in this district, we have never been without a representative who lived in Williamstown. And on occasion, we have had both of our representatives live in Williamstown. Part of the problem of that is that most of the east side of the district has no historic or current relationship with Williamstown, as a matter of fact. We don't share a school district, we don't share shopping, we don't share historic or cultural ties. 20 years ago, when this district was first created, I spoke with a fair number of old timers in town about it. And several of them said to me, I don't even know how to get to Williamstown. And I'm not sure people in Williamstown know how to get to Corinth either, for that matter. And amazingly, over these 20 years that we have been in this district, we still haven't managed to develop any relationships among these towns. We also understand the process of redistricting, and the fact is that anytime the board recommends or the legislature decides to change the parameters of a district, it affects the surrounding districts. And what you end up with is dominoes. So any change in one district that affects the next district will then subsequently continue to affect changes. And as a result, rather than come here and say, well, this is what we want. And I've read all of your minutes, and I noted that earlier on you had talked about looking at what maps would look like if you began drawing at 4 different places in the state, because wherever you start affects everything else, essentially. So rather than say exactly what we think our district should look like, our request is really for you to find a way to put every town in our 6-town district into a 1-seat district. It is feasible to simply cut up the current Orange 1 district into 2 one-seat districts. That appears to be doable, but I don't know that that's necessarily the answer, because because I understand you're doing an entire state. So I think that pretty much covers most of what I want to say here. And I guess I want to ask other people from Corinth and Vershire if you have anything to add to, and I will say that it came up at town meeting, which we held 2 days ago, and the entire town was deeply enthusiastic about trying to move into a one-seat district. So do any other people from our little Orange 1 group want to add anything to what I have said? Going once, going twice.
Linda, let me ask a question.
Sure.
I could do the research, but I haven't had a chance to. In the decade prior to when these towns were assembled into a 2-member district, how was Corinth aligned into with what other towns was Corinth
We were
bundled with for a single member?
we were at that time with Bradford, and Corinth is a school choice district, and we sent most of our high schoolers to high school in Bradford, and had long historic ties as that being one of our main shopping towns and cultural centers. So that made a great deal of sense, and it was that way for quite some time. And the change was made in 2000. And for whatever it's worth, I lobbied in 2010. I lobbied Chap Smith and others to see if we could affect the same change I'm asking for today. And I did that unsuccessfully, so.
Well, I think it's good that you're all gotten organized and engaged earlier in the process this time, Linda. Ed, Adrian, do you have a question or a comment?
Well, both. I have been to Corinth, Linda. I was actually, it's the site of my entire movie career. When they filmed Stranger in the Kingdom, I was an extra in the cockfight scene right behind Rusty DeWeese. And it's a beautiful town. I thought I heard you say that we could divide every single town up into its own district.
No, perhaps I misspoke. There is a way to divide our 6 towns into 2 one-seat districts.
Okay, got it.
But that would require taking one of the smaller towns and appending it to Williamstown, thus making them the mosquito in that scenario. And I, for one, am not anxious to designate a particular town to be the one to draw the short straw, essentially, and end up being dominated by a much larger town. But it can be done. There are ways to make a two-town district and a 4-town district, and each of them being 1 seat. But I'm sure the one town that goes with Williamstown would not be happy about it.
Okay.
Well, I
Thank you.
meant one town would be Washington. That I'm not sure that it would either be Washington or Orange, but I'm not sure that Orange actually abuts Williamstown. I know Washington does.
Orange is not contiguous. I believe Chelsea might be also.
Yeah, so that would be the choice.
Yes, and as I say, if you speak to people in Washington or Orange, they might not be happy about it, honestly.
But it could be something different, Williamstown and Brookfield, or we don't know where we're going with this. Maybe we should start looking at single districts by starting with Corinth. And we'll go from there.
I would not object to that, certainly.
From east to west, right, Tom? Yeah, thank you, Linda, and your group for.
Tom, could I just ask a question?
Sure. I didn't see you, Rob, there.
Hey, Linda, thanks very much for your comment and your testimony. I guess my question would be, because we don't know exactly what the town by town numbers are yet, and they may have shifted over time. So thank you for looking at the map. But what would you think the reaction would be if we had to split a town in order to make the two single member districts work? So, you know, like half a town would go with Williamstown and the other half would be apportioned to the other, just for one example. Would that be a deal breaker, or would people be okay with that?
I don't think people in Corinth would be okay with it. And I cannot speak really for, say, Washington or Chelsea or Orange. Honestly, I would be surprised if a town of somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 people would feel comfortable being split. I have a feeling that we all think Williamstown should be split because that's got 3,500 people. Easy for me to say, obviously. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I don't see any other hands raised. Again, thank you. This is helpful for the board to get a more practical taste of the dynamics of on the ground, real live people and towns redistricting challenges. And I know you will stay tuned.
I certainly will, and I very much appreciate your time and your attention. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else here in the meeting from the public who would like to take advantage of the public comment period of our meeting? Okay. Seeing none. Okay, we'll move on. Does anyone who took the recent Maptitude second round training would like to comment on how it went, what you learned, and how it enhanced your proficiency? Let me ask you this: who took it?
Oh,
Mary?
thanks. This is Jeannie. Thank you, Tom. There were 2 sessions, and Mary and I were at the first one, and Mary and I and Jeremy were at the second one, if I have that right. And just speaking for myself, I found it extremely helpful. There's quite a bit was review. That is to say, kind of almost starting from the beginning, but moving fairly quickly to get up to being able to really get in there and remind me, I guess I would say, how to form either Senate districts or House districts. Tracy was the person who helped train us. She also was very helpful in providing the steps so that we can use at least the most recent estimates for population, which is 2019 data from the census. Unfortunately, as we know, that still leaves a lot of questions between the 2019 estimate and the 2020 data that we haven't gotten yet. So that's the most frustrating thing I would say at this point. I think from my point of view, the Maptitude training was very useful. I could see, how to use it to form, to put together potential maps. Our biggest impediment right now is not having the actual data. So
Okay.
that's my 2 cents at the moment.
Mary, do you want to add anything to that from your experience? Mary, you seem to be muted.
Different. Okay, am I still muted?
We hear you now.
sometimes it just wants a different thing. Anyway, I agree with what Jeannie said, and in response to your question about proficiency, I think it will improve my proficiency once I start really practicing.
Okay. Good. Jeremy?
No, I thought it was good. Again, just to get back in there and refamiliarize myself with it. So no, I thought it was super valuable.
Okay. Good. Has any of you yet started sketching out a tentative version of a Senate or a House plan, either for part of the state or beyond that?
That was one of the things that we did in the training, although, you know, doing that seems a bit futile because we're going to have to throw it all away and start over anyways. So I didn't really get too invested in, you know, in it either way. We know the numbers are going to change. We know the numbers are going to be probably not vastly different, but different enough that we shouldn't settle on, you know, being real comfortable about what the what a particular county or town looks like. So
Good. Okay.
and Tom Koch has his hand up.
Thank you, Jeremy. Unfortunately missed these sessions, and I really need retraining on this. I gather that I haven't really missed much at the present time because of the state of affairs on the with the census figure. But once we get them, we're going to be into a lot of quick and intensive work, and I know I would not be prepared for that at the present time. So, who can I look to train me? Who should I contact?
Tom, I will be in touch with you about that because I'm pretty much in the same boat, and I'm working on something in that regard. So
Great.
I'll reach out to you and anyone else who is in this that.
If we can get to the point where we can do it in person, I think it would be a heck of a lot better than doing it by Zoom.
I don't think you'll have too many arguments with that, as long as we can find a way to do it that's safe and for everyone involved. That's for sure.
So
Thank you.
there are recordings of both of the trainings available. So I mean, you could easily go through step by step through all of the training and just, you know, work through it and then pause when it gets confusing, or go back, rewind. I mean, and then filling in any gaps if you had to do a follow-up training after that, that might be valuable.
Okay, good suggestion. Thanks, Jeremy.
How do you access that?
Somebody, I forget who sent the links out. They sent the links out.
I think Mia Crow sent an email to our .partners email addresses shortly after the trainings with an access link, Tom. And if you can't find that, let me know and I'll dig it up and resend it.
Yeah, it was sent on Tuesday.
Tom Little, or Special Master Little. I like the way that sounds, actually, Linda. So I know it's a little bit apples to oranges, but when I did this with the Burlington City Council in the last recensus, we had well, the Democrats and the Progressives had staffers from the party assisting them with the maps. Now, I'm not suggesting that we start bringing party people in necessarily, but, you know, as opposed to a lot of commissions, we do have, I think, a budget and sort of a robust staffing through various agencies. So essentially the way it worked is we would sit together with a map of Burlington with the representatives of that committee, and people would say, move this line here, move this line there. And frankly, for me anyway, that was a lot more productive than everybody coming up with maps on their own, especially since there were different levels of proficiency with the program at that time. So I'm wondering if we're going to have any kind of staffing, nonpartisan staffing to help us with that.
I don't have an immediate answer, Ed, but it's a helpful question, a reminder, and it's on my list now to take up with the leadership at the SOS office. And I'll report back before our next meeting. I think that will take us to the next agenda item, which is to hear from Susanna Davis and Brittany Wilson, respectively the chair and a member of the Vermont Racial Equity Task Force, about the report that it released in the middle of January, which includes a recommendation regarding the redistricting process and outcomes. That report was shared with the Apportionment Board, and I don't recall whether it's been posted on our website. I'll check on that. If it isn't, I'll make sure that it does get there. But without further ado, welcome Susanna and Brittany. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your presentation and a chance to answer questions. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. Buenos dias, everybody. Susanna Davis, Racial Equity Director. I did put the link to that report in the chat just for convenience. And on that website, you'll also find a link to our previous report from September, which I think gives a little bit more deep coverage of some of the issues that are mentioned in the January report. So we don't want to take up too much of your time, just want to talk to you a little bit about everybody's favorite topic, racism, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about what it means in the context of your work, and hopefully give you some ideas on how we can incorporate equity into your process. And before I go any further, I just want to stop and leave it to Brittany to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. Brittany Wilson, Deputy Chief of Staff in Governor Scott's office and a member of the Racial Equity Task Force. Again, thanks for having us. I'll turn it back over to you, Susanna.
All right. And I should have checked this in advance. I apologize. Do I have screen share? I don't. I did have a couple of slides I wanted to show, and I don't know if we can.
Let me see if I can do that. This is JP in the Secretary of State's office, and I am, let's see here.
Thank you. If not, I'll just paint you a word picture.
Does anybody, do you know where that may be? I don't see that as an option. I can make you a host. That might be able to do it.
Oh yeah, then I'll be unstoppable.
I don't think you need me to be unstoppable.
Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna find the correct slide. Share. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Let's get started. Okay. So I just first want to start a little bit by telling you who the Racial Equity Task Force is, why we're talking to you. So the task force is made up of 12 people total. That's 10 appointees and 2 alternates. These are the folks you have. We have 3 community reps, representatives from the NAACP, the law enforcement community, the ACLU, the Human Rights Commission, Governor's Office, the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, et cetera. It's an incredible team. These are folks who work in grassroots organizing, in healthcare, in politics, in civil rights, human rights, you name it. And the reason that we were put together by the governor was because the governor said, hey, racial equity has a lot of issues to it. And in particular, there are 3 that I want you to look at. I'll get to what those are in a moment. So this was created by an executive order. So we are advisory to the governor. Some of the recommendations do call for legislation. And so legislators have also been very aware and very supportive of a lot of what the task force has been recommending. We have solicited input from the executive agencies, from the judiciary, from the AGO to help shape the work. So we do very much see it as statewide and collaborative with the various branches. We do things like look at data, we collect stories, which is really important. We issue reports, and those are advisory to the governor. We don't draft bills, we don't conduct hearings, we don't control money or policy. So those are some of the limitations that we have available to us. So the 3 things the governor wanted us to look at were structures of support that exist in Vermont for communities of color, hate speech and free speech, and what changes to state law could be made to strengthen our hate speech and free speech protections. And the 3rd one, which is most pertinent to your work, the how to get more representation in public office at all levels, which includes boards and commissions and local, state, and federal representation. So those were the 3 main things the governor put this task force together to analyze. And so in our 2nd report, which was issued this past January, we focused on those second 2 items, free speech, hate speech, and public office. So I know that Vermont is a unique place. So the images you see on the screen don't necessarily apply to you. What you're looking at is a collection of some of the most bizarrely shaped districts from other jurisdictions that kind of show at the extreme what inequitable apportionment and redistricting can look like. I'm sure many of you have seen like Dan Crenshaw's congressional district in Texas or PA7 or some of the other ones that you see on the screen here. That's at its most extreme. Now, the work that you all are doing in Vermont doesn't even come close to looking like some of these bizarre markings. We recognize that. However, we know that as the demographic composition of the state continues to shift, at some point we may be, or perhaps already have been, confronted with issues of how we ensure equity in districting and in the distribution or the apportionment of these district lines. We know that in other jurisdictions, sometimes these decisions are made along party lines or along other demographic lines that are designed to dilute or artificially inflate the value or the impact of the votes of certain communities. And while we know that in Vermont, you all take this work very seriously and you do it with integrity, one of the things that the task force identified as a possible remedy for, or stopgap or whatever, is making equity an explicit criterion in our process for apportionment. So that was the recommendation that came out of the report. Now, that is about the furthest boundary of my knowledge on this topic, and I am going to leave this very general slide up and ask Brittany to come in and fill in all of the smart stuff that I don't know.
Thanks, Susanna. I am absolutely no expert in this, but when we're having these conversations about, increasing representation for the BIPOC community in elected office, I think many of us are aware of the studies that show, single member districts are better for minority communities. 2-member districts were perhaps created to dilute voices. And we didn't get into a lot of detail or go into any depth in this conversation. And as a group, we didn't feel comfortable in making the specific recommendation to make single member districts, but it's something that we did discuss, and we'd like the board to strongly consider. If in fact the group finds and feels that there is benefit in Vermont with, you know, separating some of these multi-member districts into single member districts in an effort to, you know, show fairer, better representation with some of these BIPOC communities around the state. So that's kind of like a general, you know, please consider this, because as Susanna mentioned, one of our tasks is to increase, you know, people of color serving in our state. And I can imagine, again, we didn't get into a lot of details, you know, but listening to the conversation earlier with the Williamstown, Corinth large district, I could imagine a district like that benefiting some of these BIPOC communities if it were in fact split up into single member districts. So anyways, really general and vague, I know. I also know this conversation tends to be fairly political, kind of a political party battle sometimes. And I know that's a hard piece to put aside, but for the purposes of this conversation, we really felt like it could be beneficial for BIPOC community members. So that is that, and thank you.
I do see a hand up, and if I just beg your patience, I think I just have two more slides. So just to summarize, oh yes, of course, how could I forget? One of the things that the state does already is it uses an equity impact assessment tool in its budgeting and policy making. And this is one of the things that the task force would like the board to consider as it continues its deliberations and decision making. The equity impact assessment tool essentially is a questionnaire that executive agencies are required to complete and submit whenever they make a policy or a budget proposal. That questionnaire is designed to ask us the right kinds of questions to make sure we're not creating unintended disparities, and to help us better shape the proposals that we're making by anticipating some of the potential disparities in benefits or burdens. So it's a systematic examination of how different groups are going to be affected by a proposal. It's best conducted early in the decision-making process in which we're shaping our ideas. So the impact assessment tool looks like this. It has multiple sections. I think that for the board's work, you probably don't need to do the whole thing, but if you sort of scan through, pluck out the relevant ones and ensure that you've given adequate consideration to those questions, I think you'll find that it'll be a lot easier to be able to point to the equity-related factors in your work. So the two more concise recommendations we come with are, number one, consider using the equity impact assessment tool. I'm happy to forward that along as well as a slide deck that we put together to accompany it. And the second one is we encourage the board. I know that the US Census Bureau has changed some of its deadlines and pushed those back. If that does grant us a little bit more time in the interim, then the task force strongly recommends that the board consider conferring with organizations that do specialize more in equity in voting. Those orgs include NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Brennan Center, the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. We think that that will help to give a lot of clarity and help Vermont to be more sure-footed. Is that a phrase? It is now. More sure-footed in the future, so that we can confidently say that in addition to all of the other logistical and you know, bureaucratic considerations, we've also considered social justice and equity in making these decisions. That's what I've got for you. Thanks for your time. I see a couple of questions I'm happy to answer any you may have.
I think you are right about that. Tom Koch, you have your hand up? You have
Yes, I do. I have a comment and a fairly basic question. I think that there is considerable interest among the members of the board, certainly on my part, in single member districts. But the problem I've been worried about is what we heard from the people of Corinth in the previous conversation. And that is, when it comes to drawing lines, single member districts are almost inevitably going to split some towns. And I think that's going to be our major problem. I don't see, or haven't seen to date, how how the BIPOC community would be affected by single members or district or two-member districts. And I certainly appreciate your bringing this to our attention. I know we'll keep it in mind as we work through, and I think the checklist is certainly a good tool. But I do have one basic question. In the context of what we are doing, what is equity?
Isn't that the eternal question? So, you know, I think for different contexts, equity could be defined a little bit differently. Usually the way that we define it is where your race or ethnicity is not a predictor of your outcomes. So in other words, if I read a headline that an unarmed civilian was shot by police, and if I can bet all the loose change in the bottom of my bag that that person was Black and male, then we have an equity problem. If I can predict a person's outcomes based on race or ethnicity, right? And so when we think about equity in the voting context, we would be looking at whether, you know, whether the distribution tends to favor certain demographics over other demographics. And in our case, we're looking at race because that's what the governor assigned us to do. But you could look at this for any other context, maybe the community of people living with disabilities, maybe socioeconomic status, particularly because we have different regions around the state with different levels of affluence, right? So broadly speaking, in this context, equity means, is it statistically more or less likely that a demographic group or that a racial group is going to have its vote value weighted or inflated or deflated? And if that's the case, or if that's a risk, then we know that we have an equity problem in that context.
Okay, I'm thinking particularly Burlington, Winooski, but I could be wrong about that. Are you aware of any places in Vermont where this is most likely to be a problem?
I think someone is, and that person is not me because I'm not a subject matter expert on this topic. I just know it's something we need to be looking at. And I know that we have a couple of other folks on the call who may be better suited to answer that. So if anyone wants to jump in, and you know, please do. But I would say that particularly with the way that I would say particularly with the way that the census is changing the way that it reports demographic distribution, that might create wrong numbers for us in terms of determining where people are in the state. And so we may end up clustering communities of color or declustering communities of color without knowing it, simply because we're relying on data that's being reported funny. Otherwise, I would say, yes, areas that tend to have larger than average populations of color in the state, depending on how we chunk those out, we could end up having a really bizarre and not accurate distribution in the district.
Thank you.
And I know we have Jeannie and Ed up with questions. Susanna, either now or for you or someone else in the meeting, or maybe even better, follow up this meeting. I'm interested, and I think others are, in what Vermont-based data the task force looked at, or where we could go to find that data in a meaningful way that, as I think as as Tom Koch was suggesting, if we wanted to try to do that, where would we go and what would we look for and who might be able to help us do that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with you by email on that.
Okay. Jeannie Albert.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed hearing the presentation and considering these issues. And my background is in mathematics, teaching mathematics, and I have particular interest in voting and elections, and so I would sneak that topic into my classes whenever I could, and found that students were actually quite interested. So just as a broad introduction to me, but I just wanted to, I guess, ask a question and a comment, or I should say, make a request. I would love to see, maybe following up a little bit on what Tom was mentioning, but in a different direction. There was a mention about single versus multi-member or double member districts, and some of the ways that, in particular, the 2 or more member districts have been used to dilute voices, I think might be a way to say it. And I would love to hear more about the research that the task force was looking at in thinking about that particular question. And part of the reason I'm asking is I've done some work with Fair Vote, which maybe you're familiar with, but and my sense is that while the number of, while multi-member districts can raise issues about, people not being represented appropriately, often it's not just the fact that it's a multi-member district, it's in combination with the voting method. So that if you have, like we do, and most places do, multi-member districts and just ordinary plurality voting, or block voting, as it's sometimes called, that really does potentially magnify other problems that might be happening in terms of representation. But if you have multi-member districts with other forms of voting that are more, that lead to a more proportional representation, like ranked choice voting, then actually that's better than single member districts for representing potential subgroups within that district. So it's just a little more complicated in some ways, in my view, in what I've come across. So that was just one concern that just I would love to continue this conversation, because I think there's a lot there. I just wouldn't want to get stuck in a mode where no matter what, single member is going to be better than double member. I'm sure that there are situations where it would be. I just have a feeling I would love to look a little more towards the future, and I'm particularly interested in working towards other modes of voting in the future. So I think that's just kind of where I am. Hopefully that made sense. And so to recap, would love to see whatever studies or data the task force was looking at with respect to this question, but I also would love to continue this conversation when it comes to representation and methods of voting.
I'll just quickly comment maybe before the next question. We did not get into the conversation too deep. There were a couple of articles that our group circulated. This is, I completely agree that there are other things that also affect minority populations, and it's not just single member or multi-member districts, but just breaking it down fairly simply, I think when you've got a smaller geographic region, to cover with one person in representation, it feels to me like that's fairer and truer representation than a larger area with multiple people. I also think there, and this isn't a conversation we had, we didn't even discuss ranked choice voting. To me, that feels like a bit of a complicated process, a little bit unconventional. I don't know if our BIPOC communities in Vermont would have any sort of thoughts on that method. That's not something we discussed, but I guess I'll stop there and wait for the next question.
Thank you.
Do note, Jeannie, that in the task force's January report, there are two references made to some research on the question. One is an ACLU item from 2001, and one is a Michigan Law Review article from 1978. And I imagine there's more than that, more recent, but we do have those two as maybe a starting place to get a little bit more involved. Engaged.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I can also provide, or if folks are interested from the board and others, you know, some of the interesting results in where ranked choice voting that in multi-member districts in particular have been used after a court determined that a particular city, let's say, was in fact not using a more typical voting method, was not representing appropriately. So I do think it's kind of, things have changed a little bit. So it's just it's an interesting topic, and I would hate to forestall things that might be coming in the future.
Thanks. Got it. Mr. Adrian.
Thank you, Special Master. I actually have, I want to sort of touch back on this equity question and how to measure it. So Susanna, you mentioned, you brought up an example of traffic stops, but in the context of voting, I guess the way I would quantify that is, what's the percentage of the BIPOC community in the state, and what percentage is there in our boards and in the legislature? So do we have any numbers, at least since we're talking about the legislature, what I think the statewide is like 4% BIPOC self-identifying? Is that around right?
It's tricky. Some of the data we have are perceived, and some of the data we have are self-reported. We also have a little bit of clunky categorizing, like there's folks who may be multiracial, but who might sort of filter into one or another category. And then of course, there are some data that we just haven't collected at all. I know Senator Rahm has been surveying the various boards and commissions to see what the representation of people of color is. And I haven't seen yet the results of those surveys, but it's pretty low. I mean, it's statewide, of course, the population is just about 4% of people of color. And of course, when we think about representation and fair representation, oftentimes, and I'm not just talking about government, I mean other institutions, NGOs, corporations, et cetera, often make the mistake of trying to match population figures. But of course, we know that if Vermont is already behind the curve on that, then matching that is not necessarily the most useful goal. So what I would say is, even though our statewide population is at about 4% and our boards and commissions population might be somewhere around that, that a good goal for equity is not necessarily the raw numbers of, you know, how much melanin did we put on committees this year, but rather are enough of the communities represented and in meaningful ways, right? Like we could put 20 20 more people of color on boards and commissions, but if they're all like non-voting members or what have you, then that's not meaningful representation.
Sure. Well, we're not dealing with the boards and commissions, though. We're dealing with the legislature. So, for example, like off the top of my head, okay, so there's 30 senators. I know about at least 2 that are people of color. So that's already a greater percentage of people of color in the Senate than in the state. And maybe there's more than 2. I don't know. I'm just thinking about Senator Brock and Rahm. I don't know for sure in the legislature out of 150. I'm guessing it might be around 4 to 7%, but again, I don't know that for sure. But it seems like we're either at or above equal representation, or really above equal representation to the population. So, which leads me to the next question: is, are we doing anything wrong? And being from Burlington, I will say, and having been involved with politics here for 20 plus years, it's ridiculous for a number of reasons, not just from racial equity, but from just a pure equity standpoint, that in the city of Burlington, as a city, we have 2 1-member districts and 4 2-member districts. And that's not your fault, but it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, that's just a matter of self-preservation of incumbency. So, because there's not a lot of, while there might be some dispute between Corinth and Williamstown, Bradley Street and Beale Street's a whole nother story. So, okay, I guess that's all that I have to say. And I have a mediation I have to get to, Special Master, so I apologize, I need to go. But Brittany and Susanna, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know Ed had to step away, but I did just want to follow up on one of the comments he made. I think it's a good example he uses. Am I frozen?
Not anymore.
Oh, good. One of the examples he gave was the two senators of color he could think of out of 30, and that is technically numerically higher than the statewide average for people of color. And I think that that's a good example because it's a way that it's a reminder to us that raw numbers are one piece of it. Of course, what those raw numbers don't tell us is the distribution, right? That's Franklin and Chittenden counties represented in those 2 senators, not necessarily people of color who live in the rest of the state, right? Like the Benningtons, the Brattleboro's, the more rural areas, right? It also is indicative of the fact that we don't necessarily have representatives from the immigrant community, or there is pretty good age distribution, I suppose, within those 2 senators, but there's a whole lot more to consider in that. The other thing that I would say is that, when we think about equity and the legislature, part of it, yes, is district lines, but another thing the task force felt very strongly about is that so much of it also has to happen through upstream factors, right? Who can afford to run at all? What are the circumstances that exist, whether it's like challenges with childcare, housing, campaign financing? So we don't put this on you as a board with the insinuation that you and you alone can change the tide. And we don't want to imply that if we don't get more brown people by the end of the year, it's your fault, right? We really just see this as one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece, and it's a piece that I think helps people feel confident in the system.
You. Rob Roper, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Susanna, and thank you, Brittany, for your presentation this morning. A couple of points that I'd like to make about single-member districts in regard to that is one that Susanna just brought up is the cost. It is cheaper for a candidate to run in a single-member district than it is to run in a double-member district. So if you're trying to get more people from communities that may not have the financial resources that other communities have, I think a single-member district is fair. I also think it's interesting that we had people from Orange 1 in testifying this morning, because Orange 1 in the last election cycle was one of the few districts that we had where a member of the BIPOC community ran. LeVar Cole ran in that district, and he was from Chelsea, so not Williamstown, the big population center. Maybe he lost the primary, so maybe he would have had a better chance if he was running in a separate single member district as opposed to a multi-member district. The barriers to running in a multi-member districts for anybody, and this isn't just for the BIPOC communities, for anybody, are higher, particularly when you're dealing with people who have the cost. A smaller community that you can go door to door and you can more easily get known and with 4,300 people as opposed to 8,600 people. Especially, I'm glad we're breaking up the Chittenden County 6-pack, because then you have to deal with over 140,000 people that you have to reach out to. So I think I don't think that we're ever going to have a problem like those maps that Susanna showed in her thing, where we're trying to create districts that don't have majority populations or whatnot, just because there aren't enough people of color in the state right now that's going to be a factor. But we do, with single member districts, have a real opportunity to create more opportunities for more people to run, and that will benefit everybody. But I think it will particularly benefit these communities of people who are immigrants, people who are of lower income, and people who otherwise would see barriers to running in a multi-member district. Those are my thoughts. So thank you for indulging.
Rob, Susanna, you touched upon in passing a topic that I'm hoping you can either now or in a follow-up way shed a little more light on it for us. And that is the practice that the U.S. Census Bureau adopted for this census of using what's known as differential privacy techniques, I guess, as a means of, in a sense, masking or hiding the racial identity of members of communities out of concerns for their privacy and safety. And I probably have mangled that a little bit, but if you could shed some light on that and maybe follow up with some more information, that would be great.
I'm happy to. And I also see John from BCGI on, so I don't want to embarrass myself by speaking authoritatively about this, because I know that there are people who are better versed in this, but I would be happy to share what I know. The Census Bureau has chosen to use a reporting method known as differential privacy for the 2020 census for the first time, that basically scrambles the numbers a bit when it comes to demography of who lives where, for the purpose of thwarting those who would use that information to personally identify people. And I'm so sorry, I'm just feeling really cynical and I can't help myself, I have to say this. I think it's wild that the government cares about my privacy and safety as a brown person, but they keep murdering people who look like me. It just doesn't make sense. But that's a completely different situation. I'll save it for my diary. The point is, with differential privacy, effectively, if you were to say, oh, we have one early 30s female identified Latina person in Lamoille County, a person or an entity with enough money and researchability could reasonably deduce that that person might be me. And so the Census Bureau, instead of saying there's like 12 Latinos and 11 Black people and 19 Asian people, it might say there's like 9 Latinos and 17 Black people or what have you. This is not so much a problem for states that have larger populations and more diverse populations, but for states that have municipalities with much smaller populations, think Vermont, Alaska, et cetera, it could have a huge impact, right? Because, you know, if you take away one female Latina from Lamoille County, that could be a huge drop because there aren't that many of us to begin with, maybe. So that's what I know about differential privacy. I know that it's going to impact Vermont because we do have a lot of very small towns, and the demographics of people of color are, the population is pretty low in this state of us. I know also that there is an active lawsuit challenging this that's being brought by, as far as I know, 13-ish states. We have questioned the reasoning / motivation behind the suit, and it's unclear to us where it's going to end up. And I know that our team here at the state has modeled what effect differential privacy could have on Vermont's population if we used previous census figures and modeled that out.
That's helpful. Thank you, Susanna. John Adams, did you want to chime in with any observation?
I observed that Susanna did a great job of explaining differential privacy. I do have, if the board is interested, I do have some numbers using the latest version of the differential privacy algorithm that the census is proposing to use, which was released, I think, the first week of May. I think if you think back to the board's first or second meeting, we looked at what the impact was. And I think we focused on absolute numbers as opposed to any numbers that looked at different demographics. I will say that the distortion is far lower than it was compared to the original algorithm. But that's primarily, I think, around, again, the absolute numbers. When we look at populations of color at the municipal level, the median municipality, I think, saw around 15% change in one direction or another. So you saw populations where there are areas that had higher populations of colors, sort of having those a certain number of people being reported as in the community, in the neighboring communities. And let's see if people are interested and I can share my screen, I can actually show you what that looks like. And then in terms of legislative districts, I think the median change was around 10%. So you had over half of the districts, the House districts, reporting out either 10%, over 10% or less than 10% of what their actual numbers were.
John, that's numbers of persons of color in the district?
Correct.
Okay.
So
that is the reporting that we have access to. I can see that there sort of seems to be two levels of reporting from the census data. If the risk of the privacy risk or the safety risk would seem to be more have some more urgency to it at the reporting level of census blocks, which are much smaller in many cases than like an entire town. And I don't have my head around that yet.
right, it seems like at the county level, and I believe they might have focused at the county level for minimizing distortion. So the county level numbers look a lot better than they previously did. At the municipal level, there's maybe greater differences. You know, Vermont is a little unique in that the median population of our municipality is just over 1,200 people. That's by far the smallest in the country. And our legislative, the ideal population for a House district is a little over 4,000 people. So those are fairly small numbers compared to other places in the country. So it looks like they were focusing a little bit more on the county level in terms of accurate reporting. But I did, again, I've got the numbers for Vermont at the municipal level, if anyone is interested. I also want to be wary of doing more harm than good, given that in the end, in some regards, it won't matter because you'll have no idea what the percentage was, and those are the numbers that you'll have to work with. So it's probably maybe good to understand, but also good to understand that there's not much that the board can do about it once those numbers are released.
Okay. Thanks, John. As usual, you've added some clarity and precision to our deliberations, which is much needed from time to time. I wanted to add, make a personal comment on it. With no, I don't want to be critical of Ed Adrian, but it's occurred to me for some time that the alternative title that the statute gives to me as the chair of the Apportionment Board is Special Master. And I don't think that's a very helpful or sensitive or appropriate term to be kicking around. It relates to a very in a technical way to the role of the Apportionment Board in making determinations of fact. The way the term of a master has roots, ancient roots in the judicial system for someone who is designated as a fact finder of one sort or another. And particularly in the context of this current conversation we're having this morning, the resonance of the term special master just doesn't work. And I think it might be better if we just put that aside. And I used to think it was just a curiosity, but I think it's not helpful. So,
How about Your Eminence?
no, I don't. Yeah, I'll let you know about that. Usually it's just, hey, you. But
This is Jeannie. I really appreciate that you mentioned that as well. And it's language is very important, and it's so easy to just miss things, as I think what you're getting at. That a term that sort of has one meaning and you've never even thought about it another way. And in a way, I think that's kind of what the task force, at least in some respects, I don't want to, imply I know more than I do, but I think that's partly what it's even about, is making those, coming to those realizations and doing something about it. So, and I apologize too, I have to leave. I had thought I was going to be in the car and phoning in. I'm kind of happy I didn't have to do that, but I do actually have to leave early. But I really appreciate this conversation and our visitors, especially our visitors this morning. So have a great day.
You do, Jane.
one of the things another thing on my follow-up list is I want to do some more focused thinking and maybe get some legal advice on the extent to which the Apportionment Board can use equity, as we've been using that term this morning, in its deliberations and recommendations. I don't know that we're proscribed or prohibited from doing that, but I think it's a question worth asking and trying to get an answer to, because I think it may come up at some point, and we would want to have an intelligent response if it comes up. So anything else for Brittany or Susanna this morning? We're about the point on our agenda where we were going to move on to something else, but I don't want to forestall any further questions or comments. Okay. Well, Susanna, and could you also send us, if you haven't already posted it in the chat, send us a link to the slides you used this morning?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that there is an option to share a file, so I'll go ahead and send that to you.
Okay.
I had planned to stay for the full meeting, but unfortunately there's a scheduling conflict that popped up, so I am going to step out, but I will follow up with you on email on some of the items we talked about.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening.
We now have a series of updates to go through. John Adams, do you have anything new since our April meeting about the timing of the U.S. Census releases and the content of them?
I do not. I will say it looks like I just got a note from JP saying that I can share my screen. So if you're interested, I can show you the differential privacy maps and also send a link.
Why don't you send the link, and if we have some time toward the end, we can put them up on the screen.
Great.
So we're still dealing with the August 15 target deadline for the sort of the raw data that we need without all of the bells and whistles, and September 30th for the bells and whistles.
Yes, as far as I know.
Okay. I think that this is a carryover from last month. The House Bill 338 was enacted into law with the governor's signature on April 21, adjusting our board deadlines. I'm almost finished with a memo to the board that is focused on the role of the boards of civil authority in our work later in the year and how that's affected by the adjustments made in H 338. Some of this will just be further review, but I think review is a good thing for us to be mindful about. And it may also be something that can be used to push out to the boards of civil authority through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, for example. And that you should have that in the next 24 hours or so. As you could tell from Linda Weiss's testimony earlier on, she was in touch with me over the last few weeks to learn about our process and to ask to be heard at today's meeting. Has anyone else been hearing from constituents around the state making inquiries or asking for help understanding our process?
Nothing here.
Okay. Thank you. Rob, thanks for initiating the drafting on the second op-ed piece. I think you've received some comments or edits from me and from Jeannie Albert. Is there anyone else who wants to weigh in on that, or should we, Rob, do you want to just accept as much of that as you think you ought to, and then
yeah, all of the edits from you and Jeannie were fine with me.
Then why don't you push it out again and mark it final, and give everybody maybe 48 hours to change their mind about something, and then we can move it on out. So thanks for that.
Can do.
I haven't had any other public interactions I took at the last meeting, I told you I heard from a number of people who live in South Hero and Grand Isle concerned that they want to break up that 2-member district into 2 single-member districts. And I think they understood my explanation that that's no guarantee that you necessarily get somebody from the islands unless you representing you in the House, unless there's an island-only single-member district, which then puts other parts of the islands into a district that that may dominate the population base. The next item was to ask. I think this has been asked and answered. Has anyone done any further mapping that's worth reporting on? I have, in that regard, last time around, there was a fair amount of mapping work done on a house map with single-member districts only. And I will dust off, I think, the final version or the latest version of that and send it or post it so you can take a look at what that looks like and see where you might see some districts that might have presented some issues by splitting towns. But that might be a useful prompt for deeper thinking about actual changes to our map. Amarin or Michael, do you have any thing to share, updates from your perspective, now that maybe you have a little breathing room since the General Assembly has adjourned until whenever it comes back into session?
Tom, it's Michael Chernick from Legislative Council. Hi, thank you for the brief opportunity. I just wanted to emphasize again that when there was a discussion of staff support, that Legislative Council cannot serve as that role, that beyond the initial presentation that Betsy Ann Rask and I made to you, which now seems a long time ago, last fall, it's our role not to have a role in supporting the board, but rather to be listeners and note takers and to accumulate that information for our knowledge for legislators to use at a future date. I just wanted to emphasize that point. Other than that, the one other thing I was going to say is, and I put into the chat, I was in a reapportionment meeting, redistricting as it's called for NCSL, a little earlier this week on Tuesday, and the census states were once again emphasized that they're still anticipating them for the 15th of August for the non-formatted and the 30th of September for the formatted, and that James is giving us another update a week from Friday, and that anyone is certainly welcome to join that NCSL group feed Zoom call to listen in if he or she so desires. And that's, I believe it's 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, our time, but I can double check if anyone's interested. Thank you.
Why don't you do that, double check that, Michael? Can you tell whether it's public, that whether either of the House or Senate committees on government operations has had any discussions about starting to think about scheduling some committee time for maybe in the fall or late fall to start working on redistricting?
Ameren can weigh in as well, as I'm sure she will after I will, but I am not aware of any official or formal decisions with respect to timing as of today. That's not to say it won't happen later in the summer or early in the fall.
Hi, everyone. Ameren Abergele from the Office of Legislative Counsel. Same here. I have not heard any discussions about scheduling anything at this time.
Thank you. I will, in due course, be reaching out to the chairs of those committees to just give them an update on the work that we have been doing since the last time I checked in with them. JP or anyone else from the Secretary of State's office, any updates from you, from your perspective on any of this material?
This is JP. I don't have any updates, Tom, but certainly as far as the staffing conversation you were having earlier, we can certainly have that discussion. Our office can have that discussion with you on what else you may need from us going forward. I know basically once those numbers come, things will certainly pick up, and we may, from my perspective, we may need more hands on deck from our office at that point, just as far as coordinating all the activities that you guys want to get done.
Perfect. And John Adams, perhaps we do have some time now for you to put something up on the screen and show us what you got.
Great. Let me pull that up right now. Okay, so there's a little bit of info here and a link if anyone is interested in learning more. But what this map, and again, I think I put the link in the chat if anyone wants to open this up and interact with it. But what this is showing is sort of the absolute difference in the number, or I should say the total change in the number of populations of color by municipality. So what the census did was they released what they call demonstration data. They took the differential privacy algorithm and applied it to the 2010 census numbers. And then they showed us what the 2010, or we have the 2010 census numbers, and then they showed us what it would have been had they applied the differential privacy algorithm to the 2010 numbers. And this is using the latest release. So you can see here, the areas in green are where populations of color are reported to be higher than they actually would have been. And then the beige or brown areas are those areas that have lost or would have lost populations of color in terms of the reporting. And you can,
to be clear, so those are situations where the head count of persons of color is being intentionally manipulated as shown on the map. So green it's been increased, and red it's been decreased intentionally.
Correct, or it's been it's changed as a result of the algorithm that was applied. And just to be clear, for the definition in terms of population of color, since that is not a category in the census, what we did was we took the total population and subtracted the population that identified as white only. So that's and then below here, if you want to see by town, we've got a table, and you can sort either by the total difference or percent difference.
So I have a quick question. This algorithm is it applied only to municipalities, or does it go all the way down to census blocks as well in the final data?
it goes down to the block level. So they've reported it out at the block level, and this is aggregated in this case to the municipal level, but we can do it at any census geography.
I gotcha. So, and you said that this is the non-white population.
Correct.
Okay. So I mean, that might just be a better turn of phrase then for this as well.
This is right. This is the change or the difference in what's reported.
Scroll down to the town by town and maybe just take one town, John, and walk us through from left to right. Let's not start with Avery's Gore.
Right. So we'll look at Burlington here. For Burlington, you have here's the 2010 total population. The population as reported, total population as reported under differential privacy. You can see the difference in total numbers was 126, or third of a percentage. In terms of the non-white population or population of color, we have 4,690 under differential privacy. It was 4,614 reported, which is a difference of 76 fewer people. So that's a change of 1.6%.
The apportionment board or the legislature in turn was trying to approach its work in part with the equity concerns that were discussed earlier in the meeting, and it therefore became important to know exact numbers. This is telling us that you won't know the precise numbers, correct?
Right. We won't have the exact numbers either in terms of total population or any subgroups. For total populations, it will not be as pronounced as it will be for any subpopulations. Those differences, especially if you're looking at it as a percentage, those changes can be fairly pronounced because those populations can be fairly low. So, if we look at Cabot, for example, in 2010, we had a population of 40 in terms of population of color or non-white population. And then for differential privacy, that was reported out as 21. So that's reducing it down to half. So in terms of total numbers, not a large number percentage wise, it's a huge difference.
Okay. Thank you, John. This is helping me finally get a better grip on the concept and what it looks like on the ground.
And then I also have the numbers below for at the county level, and you can see that those make far less of a difference. Just in terms of total population, it's a fraction of a percent. On it, it's between 1 and 8 people off. And then in terms of populations of color, also a much smaller number in terms of how off it is.
comments for John? Thank you, John.
Yeah, do we have a, am I, do we actually know how many people of color are in each of these districts?
So we do for 2010, and then we will not for 2020. We will only have the numbers reported after it has gone through, or that the differential privacy algorithm has been applied to.
Okay.
I think as Susanna mentioned, there's about a dozen states that have states attorneys general that have filed suit to block the differential privacy from to order the Census Bureau to eliminate that algorithm and the changes it makes. Is there any other business that you would like to take up at this point? I'm not seeing any hands flying up. So I'm going to assume that the answer to my question is no. That lets us finish a little early and get on to something else. I'll work with JP to get the minutes, draft minutes ready in good order. Get those out to you by sometime the beginning of next week. And I'll also start building an agenda for the next meeting and working on my follow-up questions. Always feel free to just give me a ring if you'd like, if there's something on your mind that you'd like to explore. So with that, we'll stand in adjournment until we meet again. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.